Hello. This is pretty much my first video post of all time, so I'm figuring it out, and hopefully my cat won't nibble my toes too much. Still a kitten, it's okay. Um, but I want to take this time at this time of year, this time of the semester, to talk a little bit about stress and anxiety. In the first few weeks, you don't have a whole lot of work to do. You're starting your reading, you're starting maybe some posts on the class website. But generally, those big assignments, those 20-page papers, those final projects, aren't really happening yet. Even midterms is still a little ways off. But for me, as a longtime student and as a teacher, this is the time when the stress starts to happen, right? You start to think about how are you going to get all that work done in the future. So I just want to take a little bit to talk about the things I've done to assuage the stress and anxiety and keep myself focused and on track so that I eventually do get my work done. Thank you, Tibbles, for participating. The first thing I do is to plan. And even planning for me is like the typical Pisces can be stressful. So I do loose, light planning. I make sure that I know when due dates are, when assignments need to be started, and I try to plan out how much time each thing is going to take. A 20-page paper is going to take a lot longer than a 5-page paper, right? So I like to set reminders for myself on my smartphone, on my computer, on my chalkboard, whatever it is I'm using, to remind myself well in advance, weeks in advance, that I need to get started. And this also involves setting specific study times, right? During the week, you might have an hour or two in between classes, and those are perfect times to use for studying, to get prepared, especially. You come out of your German 101 class, your language class, whatever, getting right to work keeps that stuff fresh in your mind. You remember what your professor said. You can even kind of recall how, things sounded, where things are in the book that were brought up, and your own ideas maybe that you didn't get to fully expand upon in your notes. You get the chance to do that, right? So taking advantage of study time is really important. Back to like general planning, I get myself ready for final assignments for midterms and stuff like that at least 3 weeks in advance. If it's a really big project, if it's really important to me, I start thinking about it at the beginning of the semester. I start putting together a basic general thesis, and I work on it because the first time isn't always the best, right? All the glitters are not gold. It's a work in progress generally, putting together some work. So the thesis statement that I have in week 5 is much different than the thesis statement I end up using for my final in week 15, right? It's maybe somewhat similar, but I've learned a thing or two, and I've done research, I've done reading, I've taken my notes, I've thought about it, and it's going to change. So getting an early start is really important. Another important thing to do, and this is number one really, is just to keep up with the work. Go to class, show up on time, ask your professor questions before or after class. During office hours is the best, to make sure you understand the material and what is expected of you. I've had a lot of different types of English professors, for example. Some were very strict and they wanted very critical academic tone throughout everything I did. Others, I got by with dropping a joke or two in a parenthetical in an essay. Ow, Tibbles, that hurts a lot. You go on the floor now. And that was perfectly fine. I still got an A on those papers where I made jokes and kind of tried to amuse my professor a little bit, show how smart I am and the different ways I can think about it. So it's important to know what you're doing for what class, right? Everyone's a little different, so keeping up with the work is really important. Keeping up with the professor, the class, the schedule that they set, so that you don't get off track, so that you're not catching up, so that you're not doing 3 short essays to like catch up with the class when you have that 10-page, 20-page paper due at the end also. So yeah, keeping up with the class notes and keeping up with your own notes. Making sure that you reread them, you highlight important things, you add to them, you make note of your thoughts as you go along. These little things in the end do add up, and they make that final work a lot easier. And not even just the final work, right? Even those assignments where you're posting to your class website, or you're just doing reading reviews that are a page long, or for those quizzes that are just 10 to 15 questions. If you're constantly keeping these things in mind, you're going to do a lot better. And I want to stress the point that it isn't about how hard you study. If you're studying really hard, if you're really racking your brain and it's starting to hurt, you're throbbing, you're doing something that's not really, maybe just not healthy is what I'll say. For me, I found the best way to keep my sanity and also keep myself up at the academic level I wanted to be at was to do light reading, to do light notes. I didn't have to spend an hour dedicated to going over my notes and revising them and highlighting and pulling out quotes and things. 15 minutes is fine, right? Just keeping it fresh is a really important thing, I think. If you overdo it, you can burn out. And so this goes into my next little piece of advice. When you're studying, when you're reading, take it slow. If you're beating your head against the wall, you're beating your head against the wall. That's not a good thing to do, right? If you think about it in terms of how it relates to exercising, you don't go to the gym, you don't go to to play frisbee with your friends, you don't go to some physical activity without stretching, without jogging first, without warming up, right? So when you have a chapter or 3 chapters to read in a week, don't just sit down and try to read them all at once. First of all, it's going to be really difficult. You're going to strain yourself, right? It's a lot of information to take, especially when you're taking your class seriously. And also, there's so much that you're not going to get everything, right? Most of it's just going to go over your head, and you're just going to be reading it as a passive act. We want to be active when we're learning. So the advice I got from my director at the writing center when I was a tutor there in grad school was to begin with scanning. First check the table of contents and look at section headings, look at the titles, get a feel for the diction, the words that are going to be used, just the general theme of what you're looking at, and also how that book writer arranges information. Because maybe you're going to want to jump around a little bit. You'll start at the end and go to the beginning at the last. Who knows? But you'll get an idea of how you want to read once you've just looked at it generally. And also then, when you're going into the chapters and doing the actual reading, read the introductory paragraph first. And then I like to do that kind of sin that people say you should never do when you're reading a novel. I like to read the last sentence. I like to read the last paragraph, the concluding paragraph. Because in those concluding paragraphs and in the introductory paragraphs, you get the general information, right? You know what's going to be talked about and then what has been talked about. And you'll have an idea, again, of what you're reading. So then when you go and you read all the body paragraphs, all the different sections, you'll already have a frame of mind that is prepared for that reading. You won't go in blind and just try to pick things up as you're going along. You'll have had a very general introduction that was easy and not too stressful. And then you'll get the bulk of information that adds on to that. To me, it's something that keeps the work feeling light, even though I'm putting all of my effort toward it. And also reduces the stress, because stress for me is caused by strain a lot of times, and trying to get all the reading done at once is really difficult. When I was in fiction classes, we would read a novel every week, or in poetry we'd read a poetry book every week, and it's a book a week is kind of pushing it, especially when you're doing that for 3 different classes plus you're writing plus you're working or whatever. And so I always found it was a good idea to read the reviews, Look at what the author says about the book in an interview. Get an idea of what's going on. And then the learning part comes a lot easier. I'm not doing the reading plus the sort of self-commentary plus thinking about how I'm going to write about this later. A lot of that then is put to the side, and I'm looking at the thing for what it is, and I'm taking in all the information, and my own ideas already have a sort of platform that I can then fill in. So take time, increase over time. And I'm not saying just scan the whole time. If all you do is scan your books, you're not going to pass. Or at worst, you're not going to learn anything. So start with the scanning, then do the heavy reading. Study smart, right? Another piece of advice, I kind of mentioned this earlier, is to talk with your professors. Most professors, a lot of professors, teachers in general are good people who are interested in their students and want to help. So they love it when students come up and talk to them, when they ask questions about what happened in class or about the upcoming assignment. If all you're asking is like, what's the page count? What's the word count? What questions are going to be on the test? And they may not, they may not respond to you so well. But if you express a little interest, if you express that you want to learn and that you're there to learn and that you find the class interesting in some way, they're going to help you out. You're going to learn more details about what's expected on the final paper than just what's in the syllabus or what's mentioned in class. I'm not saying they're going to let you cheat. They're not going to give you the free A or something. But having a discussion with the professor helps you set the tone for your papers and projects. They will suggest further reading and other sources that are specific to your idea. In class, they give the general spiel, and they'll bring up their references and their suggested readings, on the fly and in general. But when you come up to them and say, hey, I have a specific topic that I want to write about, do you have any suggestions? They'll say, oh yeah, look at this, this, and this author, this lecture, this TED Talk, whatever it is. Oh God, that helps so much. That is a major stress reliever in my book. So again, just to go over things real quick before ending this messy, kind of sloppy post, the first video. Again, plan, get things ready, know the schedule, and get started early. Keep up. Go to class, talk to your professor, take your notes and go over them. Stay on that plan, on that schedule that you have. Keep with it. When it comes to studying, start slow, ease yourself into it. Do some warm-ups, do some laps before you run the sprint, right? Get an idea for what you're doing before you just jump into it. You want to know how cold the water is before you dive in, right? And then talk to your professors. Get to know what the real gritty stuff of the class is all about. They will help. They love to help. Again, most of them. And then last of all, just keep your head up. You can do it. You got into the school. You're already starting out doing the work. You know what it takes. You've written papers. You've taken tests. It's not a big deal. You can do it. And so, good luck. And don't study hard, study smart.